The night has a way of remembering things. It holds on to secrets long after the sun has bleached them from memory. Weddings are supposed to be about light, about hope, about the promise of a new day dawning between two people. But what happens when the night decides to attend? Shadows under the reception tables begin to lengthen. They twist into shapes that have no business being there. Some celebrations you see are not blessed. They are cursed from the moment the first invitation is sent. Sealed with a kiss and a premonition of dread. The air grows heavy, thick with something ancient and unseen. We tell ourselves it's just nerves, the jitters. We ignore the flicker of a candle when there is no breeze. The first story takes us to a grand historic hotel. Gilded ceilings, crystal chandeliers that weep light onto the polished dance floor. It was the perfect setting for Eleanor and James. They were a perfect couple, young, beautiful, so deeply in love it was almost blinding. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume. The string quartet played a soft, romantic melody that drifted through the ballroom like a sweet dream. Everything was exactly as it should be. The champagne flowed freely. Laughter echoed off the high, painted ceilings. As the evening wore on, Eleanor began to notice him, a man standing near the far wall, just beyond the main circle of guests. He was tall and elegantly dressed in a vintage suit that seemed out of place, yet perfectly tailored. He never spoke. He never ate. He simply watched. While the room buzzed with life and movement, he remained a fixed point, a statue carved from shadow. His eyes, dark and deep, seemed to follow her every move.
Eleanor leaned over to her new husband. "Who is that man?" she whispered, trying to be discreet. James followed her gaze and frowned. "I have no idea," he admitted. "I've never seen him before in my life."
They asked the best man, they asked the maid of honor, they even asked their parents. No one knew him, no one had invited him. Yet he was there, a silent sentinel at their celebration. A cold knot of anxiety began to form in Eleanor's stomach, a stark contrast to the warmth of the champagne. The mystery deepened when the photographer developed the wedding photos weeks later. The man was in almost every shot of the reception. He was there in the background as Eleanor and James cut the cake. He was visible over her father's shoulder during their dance. He was even there in a candid shot of the flower girl, a dark figure lingering by a doorway. But in every single photograph, his face was obscured. It was either blurred beyond recognition, hidden by a passing guest, or shrouded in an unnatural patch of darkness. It was as if the camera itself refused to capture his identity, as if he was not meant to be truly seen. The unsettling feeling from the wedding night never quite left Eleanor. The photographs became a source of obsession. She would spend hours staring at them, trying to make out the man's features in the vintage suit. A faded black and white photograph from the 1920s, a picture of her great-grandparents on their wedding day, on the same steps of that historic hotel. And there, just behind them, stood the man. This time his face was clear. His features were sharp. His eyes dark and piercing. He was undeniably the same person from her wedding photos, frozen in time.
Her grandmother saw Eleanor's face. She pointed a trembling finger at the man. "That's him," she whispered. "He was at my wedding too."
Now he is drawn to other weddings in that ballroom. He attends every one, a silent, sorrowful guest searching for his lost love in the crowd. On the happiest day of her life, she had been watched by the dead. A spirit of profound loss had shared in her joy. The wedding photos were no longer a mystery, they were a haunting. Our second story begins in a quiet, rural town, nestled in the rolling hills of the countryside. Here, traditions run deep. Maria was set to marry her childhood sweetheart, David. It was a small, intimate affair, planned with more love than money. The heart of the wedding was Maria's dress. It wasn't new, it was a family heirloom, passed down through 4 generations of brides. When Maria first tried on the gown after it was taken out of storage, she felt a strange, inexplicable chill, even though the room was warm. She dismissed it as excitement, but as the wedding day drew closer, the feeling intensified. Sometimes, when she was alone in the room with the dress, she thought she heard something. A faint sound, like the rustle of silk when there was no breeze. Or a soft, almost inaudible whisper, like a sigh. The night before the wedding, Maria couldn't sleep. She went downstairs to look at the dress one last time. It was hanging on a mannequin in the living room, bathed in moonlight from the window. It looked ethereal, almost alive. As she stood before it, she heard the whisper again, clearer this time. It seemed to be coming from the dress itself. A soft, mournful sound, Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her pre-wedding excitement. She reached out a trembling hand to touch the delicate lace bodice, and as her fingers made contact, a wave of intense sadness washed over her. It was not her own. The feeling was overwhelming, a profound, crushing despair that seemed to emanate from the very threads of the gown. The beautiful heirloom now seemed like a shroud, a vessel for some forgotten misery. As she stood before the mirror, whispers swirled, weaving frantic, overlapping pleas. "Don't do it. He is not who you think. Run." The voices were faint, like ghost thoughts, but insistent. Maria's reflection stared back, face pale, eyes wide with terror. Reluctantly, Maria allowed them to help her into the gown. The moment the silk and lace settled onto her skin, the feeling returned, 100 times stronger. It was more than sadness. It was a cacophony of quiet desperation. The dress felt heavy, constricting, like it was physically holding her back. Walking down the aisle was torture. With every step, the whispers grew more frantic. Smiling faces blurred into a meaningless collage. The organ sounded like a funeral dirge. She looked at David, her beloved David, waiting at the altar. A sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced her heart. The whispers had been a warning, not from one woman, but from all the women who had worn the dress before her. Her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother. They hadn't been happily married. They had been trapped. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Maria ripped at the collar of the dress. "No," she gasped, her voice shaking. She turned and fled. She ran from the altar, from her family, from the man she thought she loved. She didn't stop until she was back in her house, tearing the cursed gown from her body. It fell to the floor in a heap of silk and sorrow. Sobbing, she searched the hem and found it. The tiny tarnished locket her great-grandmother had hidden. Inside the locket was not a picture. It was a tiny folded piece of paper. On it, in faded ink, were the words, "He is not what he seems. I am a prisoner. Tell no one." It was a message from the past, a warning that had finally been heard. Maria was the first bride to listen. The wedding was canceled, the family shattered. Maria never wore the dress again. It remains locked away, a silent monument to generations of hidden abuse. Its whispers, finally, blessedly, silent. She broke the cycle, but she is haunted by the voices of the women who could not. Our final story is one that defies easy explanation. It's about Mark and Chloe, a modern couple getting married at a sleek, minimalist art gallery. No old ghosts or family curses here, or so they thought. The main hall was lined with large, ornate mirrors in antique frames, an artistic contrast to the modern space. It was chic, sophisticated, and felt completely safe. The wedding was a lively party filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Mark was ecstatic, a man completely and utterly in love. The strangeness began subtly, a trick of the light, a flicker in the periphery. While mingling with guests, Chloe would catch Mark's reflection in one of the many mirrors. But the reflection was off. If Mark was laughing with a friend, his reflection would be standing perfectly still, its expression flat and empty. If he was taking a sip of his drink, the man in the mirror would have his hands clasped behind his back. It happened so quickly that she would blink, and the reflection would be normal again, perfectly mimicking his every move. She brushed it off as a symptom of stress and too much champagne. As the night progressed, the discrepancies became more pronounced and harder to ignore. During the speeches, Mark stood beside her, his arm warmly around her waist. Chloe glanced at a mirror across the room and her blood ran cold. The reflection of Mark was not looking at the best man giving the toast. It was looking directly at her. Its eyes were dark, intense, and held an expression of cold, calculating intelligence she had never seen on her husband's face. It felt possessive, predatory. It was a stranger wearing her husband's face, staring at her from another world behind the glass.
She squeezed Mark's hand, her heart hammering. "Mark, look," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Look in the mirror." He turned his head and looked.
The reflection was him, perfectly normal, smiling. He turned back to her, a look of loving concern on his face. "What is it, honey? Are you feeling all right?"
She looked back at the mirror. The reflection was still smiling, just like the real Mark. Had she imagined it? Was she losing her mind? The stark difference between the terrifying image she had seen and the normal reflection she saw now was deeply unsettling. She felt a creeping dread that something was fundamentally wrong with her perception of reality. The final moments of the reception arrived. It was time for the couple to leave. They were to be sent off into their new life by a cheering crowd. Chloe waited by the exit, forcing a smile for her friends and family. She stood near one of the largest, most ornate mirrors. She stared at her own reflection, trying to steady her nerves. In the glass, she saw Mark approaching her from behind. It wasn't the real Mark, it was the reflection Mark. He stopped behind her reflection, face cold and emotionless. He slowly raised a hand and placed it on her reflection's shoulder. Chloe froze, every muscle screaming.
Then the real Mark came up behind her and tapped her shoulder. She jumped with a small scream. "Ready to go, my love?" he asked. She looked at his kind, familiar face.
She looked back at the mirror. In the glass, the cold other Mark was gone. It was just her and the real Mark, smiling back. Terror and confusion overwhelmed her. In the years that followed, Chloe never saw the strange reflection again. Her life with Mark was happy, normal. But she could never shake that night's feeling. She could never look at her husband without a flicker of doubt. Sometimes, late at night, when Mark is asleep, she sees a flicker of that same cold stillness in his sleeping face. An echo of the stranger in the mirror. Did the cold, possessive entity behind the glass somehow succeed? Did it swap places with her husband in that final moment? Chloe will never know for sure. These stories are reminders that on a day of ultimate union, other things might seek a union of their own. So next time you're at a wedding, look closer. Watch the shadows. Check the reflections. Be careful who you toast to. You might just be raising a glass to the damned. If you enjoyed these tales, subscribe for more true horror stories. Tell us which one chilled you the most in the comments. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your candles lit.